Hello and welcome, dear listener. Wherever you are in the world, whatever kind of day you've had, this is your moment to let go, to set aside the weight of the world, and to step quietly into a gentler rhythm. Let the tension melt from your shoulders. Let the noise of the day fade into silence. Feel your breath grow slow and steady. This is a place of peace, a place where you are safe, unhurried, free to simply drift. You've entered a story space, a quiet circle shared by others, just like you, who crave stillness, wonder, and rest. And tonight, our tale takes us back, far back, to the medieval world. A world of candlelit halls, flickering shadows, and the scent of firewood and earth. Of whispered prayers, creaking carts, handmade bread, and whispered legends passed from one generation to the next. What was it truly like to live in those forgotten days? What stories linger in the stone, in the silence, in the stars above castles long crumbled? That's where we'll go tonight. But before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening from? What time is it in your corner of the world? Leave a gentle comment below. It's always a quiet joy to read your words, and to see how this little circle of peace stretches across oceans and time zones. And if this story soothes you, if it helps you drift or dream or simply breathe a little easier, I warmly invite you to subscribe. That way you will always have a story waiting for you. Imagine waking up not to an alarm, but to the sound of roosters and the distant hum of a village stirring. The air is thick with wood smoke, and the chill seeps through the cracks of your modest hut. This was daily life in medieval times. No electricity, no running water, just hard labor from dawn till dusk. But here's what they never tell you. The real struggle wasn't just the work. It was the constant fear of famine, disease, and simply surviving the winter. Let's step back into a world where every day was a battle against the elements. That first breath of morning air hits you like a wall. Wood smoke, animal dung, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. This isn't just some bad smell you can walk away from. It's your new normal. In a medieval village, every home has a fire burning almost constantly. You need it for cooking, for warmth, for light. But that smoke doesn't have anywhere to go except straight into your lungs. Day after day, you're breathing in smoke that stains the walls black. It gets into your clothes, your hair, even your skin. After a while, you stop noticing the smell, but your body never stops noticing the damage. Chronic coughs were so common they had special names. Potter's rot for the constant hacking, black lung for the coal workers. Peasants didn't have those job titles, but they got the same conditions anyway. Medical records from the time show respiratory diseases killed more people than the plague in some years. Smoke inhalation caused lung inflammation that often developed into pneumonia. Imagine trying to work the fields when every breath feels like swallowing broken glass. That was a routine for medieval peasants. Research on skeletal remains shows medieval commoners typically died about 10 years earlier than nobles. A big part of that was the constant smoke exposure. Their ribs often show signs of chronic pleurisy, the lungs literally sticking to the chest wall from years of inflammation. And this wasn't just bad for the peasants. Even nobles in their stone castles couldn't escape it entirely. You might think the wealthy lived in clean air. Their homes had chimneys, after all. But those early chimneys were terrible at actually venting smoke. Wealthy households just had more rooms to spread the smoke around. Their lung tissue still showed the same blackening when examined centuries later, just not quite as bad as the peasants. The rich did have one advantage. They could afford to build separate kitchen buildings. But even this just delayed the damage. Historical accounts describe noble women developing the palace cough after years of breathing smoke from their elaborate fireplaces. The difference was, they might live to 50 instead of 40 before it killed them. Medieval doctors actually thought smoke was good for you. They believed it warded off disease by clearing bad humors. Some prescribed sitting in smoke-filled rooms as treatment for lung conditions. This obviously didn't help, but it shows how trapped they were. Smoke was so unavoidable, they had to convince themselves it was beneficial. The reality was brutally simple. Without fire, you froze or starved. With fire, you slowly poisoned yourself. There were no good choices, just varying degrees of bad ones. Even when people knew the smoke caused harm, they had no alternatives. Windows were small to keep heat in, and opening them in winter meant risking hypothermia. Some peasants tried burning different woods to reduce smoke. Beech and oak burned cleaner than pine, but all wood produces harmful particulates when burned indoors. Others built crude hoods over their fires to direct smoke upward. These helped slightly, but smoke still filled the home. The only true escape was summer, when you could cook outside. But summer brought its own hazards: mosquitoes, food spoilage, and the dreaded harvest work that left you exhausted before winter even arrived. And of course, the smoke returned as soon as the temperature dropped. No one wrote poetry about the joys of breathing clean air in the Middle Ages. It simply wasn't an experience anyone had regularly. The best you could hope for was a clear day, when the wind carried the village's smoke away, instead of right back down your chimney. Even nobles in their castles woke up coughing some mornings, their expensive tapestries reeking of last night's fire. This constant background of smoke damage made people more vulnerable to every other disease. When the plague hit, lungs already weakened by years of smoke inhalation were less able to fight off infection. What we'd consider a minor cold could turn deadly when combined with existing lung damage. And with fires burning year-round, there was never time for the lungs to heal. The medieval world ran on smoke, and that's exactly what it did to people's health. Slowly consumed them from the inside. Today we take clean air for granted, but for centuries, just breathing was a health hazard, with no solution in sight. Your hands are raw from grinding rye all morning. The stone quern scrapes your knuckles as you push the grain back and forth, back and forth. This is just the beginning. Now you'll knead the dough, wait for it to rise, if you're lucky, then bake it in the communal oven your whole village shares. One loaf takes hours of work before you can even think about eating. But this hard work is nothing compared to what happens when the grain fails. A bad harvest doesn't just mean going hungry. It means watching your children swell up from hunger edema, their bellies bloated while the rest of them wastes away. It means boiling tree bark and grass to fill your stomach when the grain runs out. In medieval Europe, about 1 in every 3 years saw some level of crop failure. You didn't need a complete disaster. A few weeks of bad weather at the wrong time could cut yields in half. That was enough to kill people. The grain itself could turn against you. Ergot fungus often infected rye crops, turning nutritious bread into poison. The symptoms started with a creeping numbness in the limbs, then violent convulsions. Victims described burning sensations in their arms and legs. They called it St. Anthony's fire. Some hallucinated vividly before dying in agony. Whole villages could be wiped out by bad rye. In 994 AD, an ergot outbreak in France killed an estimated 40,000 people, and there was no way to know which bread was safe until people started convulsing. Even when grain grew well, you didn't get to eat much of it. As a peasant, you might owe a third of your crop to the lord of the manor right off the top. Then the church took its tithe, another 10%. What remained had to last your family until next harvest, while still providing seed for planting. If you ran short, you begged, borrowed, or starved. The law often forbade peasants from hunting game to supplement their diet. Those animals belonged to the nobility. The wealthy ate better, of course. Their bread was made from finely sifted wheat flour, without the bran and germ that made peasant bread dark and coarse. White bread became such a status symbol that laws in some places forbade commoners from eating it. Your place in society was literally visible in your loaf. The darker the bread, the lower your status. Even on good days, peasant bread was dense, gritty, and full of whatever debris made it past the milling process. Chipped teeth were common from biting down on small stones in the flour. Failed harvests triggered desperate measures. Records show medieval people resorting to cannibalism during severe famines. The Great Famine of 1315 to 17 killed millions across Europe after years of terrible weather ruined crops. Contemporary accounts describe parents abandoning children they couldn't feed. Some turned to crime just to be imprisoned where they might get fed. Others ate grass and dirt until their digestive systems shut down. Even the wealthy suffered during these crises, though they were the last to starve. This constant insecurity shaped medieval minds. Superstitions about ensuring good harvests ran deep. People carried charms to protect crops, followed elaborate planting rituals, and blamed bad harvests on moral failings or witchcraft. Church records are full of people praying not for wealth or comfort, but simply for enough to eat one more year. The fear of hunger dwarfed all other concerns. Even relatively prosperous peasants kept their grain stores hidden and their appetite for celebration muted. You never knew when you'd need every last crumb. Grain shortages caused social upheaval, too. Hungry peasants sometimes revolted against landowners, though these uprisings rarely ended well. More often, people quietly abandoned their villages to seek food elsewhere, becoming part of the huge transient population that wandered medieval Europe. Some turned to begging, others to banditry. The line between the two was thin when starvation was the alternative. Your entire calendar revolved around grain. Planting time, harvest time, milling time, these were the events that structured your year. Holidays fell after key agricultural milestones, when people could afford to pause work briefly. Even the weather reports in medieval chronicles focus obsessively on conditions for growing crops. A warm spring wasn't nice, it was salvation. A late frost wasn't inconvenient, it was a death sentence. Today we complain about grocery prices, but medieval people would laugh at our anxiety. Your average peasant had enough food anxiety for 10 modern shoppers. One season of bad weather could mean choosing which family member got to eat that day. Even in good years, you lived with the knowledge that next year might be the one that broke you. Bread wasn't just food, it was life itself, and the threat of losing it never went away. The never-ending itch. That itch between your shoulder blades isn't going away. You scratch it again, knowing full well what's causing it, the lice and fleas that live in your straw mattress and wool clothes. Personal hygiene in medieval times wasn't just bad by modern standards, it was practically non-existent. You might wash your hands and face occasionally, but full-body baths happened maybe once or twice a year if you were lucky. Water was hard to haul and heat, and many believed bathing opened your pores to disease. So, you just lived with the filth, and the parasites that came with it. Everyone had lice, everyone. They infested hair, clothes, and bedding. Fleas jumped from person to person in crowded homes. Mites burrowed into skin, causing itchy rashes. Archaeological digs of medieval sites find flea dirt and lice eggs in nearly every household. Your straw mattress was a paradise for these pests, warm, rarely changed, and full of cracks for them to hide in. People scratched so constantly they developed permanent calluses on their fingers from rubbing against rough wool clothing. These weren't just nuisances, they killed people. Fleas carried the bubonic plague. Lice spread typhus, which caused high fevers and rashes before often proving fatal. Medieval people didn't understand germ theory, but they knew crowded, filthy conditions led to disease. They just couldn't do much about it. Even when they tried to clean, their methods often made things worse. Sweeping packed dirt floors just kicked up more dust and flea eggs. People did attempt pest control in some truly bizarre ways. One common method was to catch a flea, put it in a box and reason with it to leave your home. Others rubbed mercury on their skin, which did kill some parasites, but also poisoned the wearer. Some hung herbs like wormwood or lavender, which helped slightly but couldn't compete with the infestation levels. The most effective method was combing hair with fine-toothed knit combs, but this took hours and needed repeating constantly. Wealthier folks had slightly better conditions: feather beds instead of straw mattresses, regular laundry changes, and servants to pick lice from their hair. But fleas didn't care about social status. Nobles just had more fabric in their homes for the pests to hide in. Accounts describe kings and queens scratching during important meetings. The wealthy could afford perfumes to mask body odor, but these just added another layer of smell without fixing the underlying filth. The relentless itching drove people to distraction. Chronic sleep loss from scratching made every other hardship worse. Some medieval medical texts describe morbus therius, a condition of extreme agitation caused by constant lice bites. People developed nervous tics from habitual scratching. The poor suffered worst, but even monks in relatively clean monasteries complained constantly about itching in their writings. Imagine trying to concentrate on anything when your entire body itches non-stop. Bathing might seem like the obvious solution, but it often backfired. Without soap as we know it, medieval people used harsh lye soaps that stripped skin of protective oils. Frequent washing with these soaps caused cracks and sores that became infected. Public bathhouses existed, but they were breeding grounds for disease. The same water might be used by dozens before being changed. Many believed bathing caused illness by upsetting the body's balance of humors. Church officials sometimes discouraged excessive cleanliness as vain. Children suffered worst of all. Lice spread through schools and crowded homes easily. Many medieval children developed impetigo, bacterial skin infections from constant scratching with dirty nails. Parents would wrap children's hands at night to prevent scratching, but the bindings often came loose. Some medical texts recommended shaving children's heads completely to combat lice, but this exposed their scalps to sunburn and infection. The psychological toll was brutal. Imagine never experiencing true cleanliness your entire life. Your scalp constantly crawled with lice. Your clothes housed fleas that bit you day and night. You scratched in your sleep until blood streaked your linens. Other people's parasites became your own through any contact. Personal space didn't exist. Families slept piled together for warmth, passing pests back and forth endlessly. Ironically, the wealthy's attempts to stay clean sometimes made things worse. Elaborate hairstyles and wigs popular among nobles provided perfect hiding spots for lice. The perfumes nobles used to cover body odor often contained substances that irritated skin, making itching worse. Nobles in some cases, the lead-in face powders caused open sores that attracted even more parasites. Even kings couldn't escape. Louis XIV famously complained about lice in his wigs in his personal writings. By modern standards, every medieval person would be considered severely infested. We'd quarantine them immediately today. Archaeologists examining medieval combs find some with grooves worn down from years of scraping out lice eggs. Medical texts contain page after page of treatments for itching sores caused by constant scratching. People developed permanent scarring from years of skin damage. There was simply no escape. You lived with itching like you lived with hunger or cold. It was just part of existence. The situation improved slightly as the Middle Ages progressed. More frequent laundering became common among those who could afford it. The Black Death made some people more conscious of cleanliness out of fear. But for most peasants, the itch never really went away. You died as you lived, scratching. Modern people complain about mosquito bites. Medieval peasants would have traded their problems for ours in a heartbeat. The constant irritation wore people down day after day, year after year, until they eventually wore out completely. That first morning, when your breath turns to mist in the air, isn't magical. It's a warning. A quiet dread curling in your chest. You count your grain again. Run your fingers along the smoked meat hanging from the rafters. You whisper a prayer, because you think it might be enough, but you're never sure. Not really. In these times, winter isn't an inconvenience. It's a siege, a test, a long, bitter trial that begins the moment the harvest ends. And even if you've done everything right, it still might not be enough. As soon as the crops are in, you begin the real work. Preserving, storing, hiding food from time and mice. You salt the meat. Smoke it if you have the wood to spare. Vegetables go into the root cellar, if your family is lucky enough to have one. Grain is measured, wrapped, hidden. But no matter how careful you are, things spoil. Mold grows. Rats find ways in. And you won't know what's failed until it's too late to fix it. Even a good harvest can betray you. The Lord takes his cut. The church takes its tithe. And what's left? That has to stretch, thin and trembling, through 5 months when nothing grows. 2 pounds of grain per person per day. That's what the records say a family needs to make it. Run the numbers for a household of 6. Then look again at the sacks in your corner. You start winter with a full storehouse, maybe. But by February, many already know what's coming. The cold doesn't wait for you to starve. It has its own ways. Your home is a patchwork. Wood, clay, straw. There's always a draft. You shove moss in the cracks. Hang old cloth if you have it. Still, by nightfall, the cold presses through. You wake with ice in your hair, frost on the blanket. And sometimes, someone doesn't wake at all. The old, the sick, the very young. Gone in the night without a sound, while the fire burns low, and no one notices until morning. Frostbite is common. Death is quiet. You don't talk about it much. You just keep moving, rationing, burning, waiting. The nobility have tapestries to warm their stone walls. You have straw that grows damp and moldy. Still, you lie close to the hearth and pretend it's enough. Because spring always comes, eventually. You just hope you'll still be there to see it.
But it wasn't just your family you had to feed. The animals, the cow, the pig, the hens, were part of your survival too. They gave you milk in spring, helped plow your fields, hatched eggs for next year's meals. But through winter, they needed to eat. And feeding them meant dipping deeper into your own food supply. So, most families made the painful choice. In autumn, they slaughtered nearly everything. The meat was salted, smoked, hung high to dry. Only the bare minimum was kept alive, just enough to breed again when the thaw came. A cow, maybe. A single sow. A couple of hens. If winter stretched on longer than expected, if the snow lingered into March, you might find yourself staring at your last cow, knowing what it meant to kill her and what it meant not to. Because without her, there would be no milk, no calves, no way to plow when the earth softened. But with her, you might not make it that far. It was a cruel trade, and it happened every year. The numbers bear it out. In medieval England, records show winter death rates spiking sharply. One study from the 14th century found that 6 out of every 10 adult deaths happened between November and March. And for children under 5, the odds were even worse. Church registers don't hide it. They show burials clustering in the late winter months, names packed tightly on the page. Sometimes winters were so bitter, they were remembered by name, like the Great Frost of 1608, when Europe stayed frozen for weeks on end, and thousands never saw the spring. And food? Monotony reigned. Day after day of smoked pork and hard black bread. No fruits, no vegetables, no milk unless you'd kept a goat. No greens, no lightness, nothing to nourish. Your body weakened at the exact moment you needed strength. Vitamin deficiencies brought scurvy, swollen gums, skin sores. They called it winter disease. The slow unraveling of the human body, from hunger, cold,
and time. The wealthy endured it better, but not by as much as you might imagine. Their castles were made of stone, cold, damp, and full of drafts. They had more spices, more preserved fruits, more firewood. But they too feared the long winter. Even kings grew sick. At the court of Henry VIII, outbreaks of the sweat, likely a form of influenza, returned every winter, claiming nobles and servants alike. Money bought comfort, but it didn't buy spring. And when spring finally came, it didn't always bring relief.
Spring was supposed to mean relief. The birds would return. The snow would melt. The earth would soften beneath your feet. But in truth, spring often brought more death than winter itself. After months of thin meals and cold floors, people were too weak to fight off what came next. The first warmth of the season didn't bring healing. It brought crowds. People gathered again, huddled in churches, in markets, in family homes. And with them came sickness. Snowmelt flooded wells and streams, carrying waste into drinking water. Illness swept through weakened villages like wildfire. Some people, desperate and starving, ate too much fresh food too quickly. Their bodies couldn't handle the sudden bounty, and they fell ill. Some died with green leaves still in their hands. Historical accounts speak of whole villages losing as many souls in April as they had in January. Survivors who had made it so far, only to collapse when the worst seemed over. Children suffered most. Those who survived the winter often couldn't survive the spring. They were too small, too fragile, what medieval healers called failure to thrive. We'd recognize it today as the long shadow of starvation. Nursing mothers were too weak to produce milk. Infant mortality spiked. Archaeologists tell us that children's bones from this time often show deep grooves, interruptions in growth caused by winter famine. By the time a child reached 10, their skeleton carried silent testimony, rings of hunger, each one marking a year they nearly didn't survive. And so, the rhythm of winter shaped everything. When to plant, when to marry, when to bear children. Babies were planned for spring, so they might grow strong before the cold returned. Tax collection waited until after harvest, when just maybe you had something to give. Even the calendar bent to winter's will. Religious feasts and holy days gathered near the solstice, offering hope when the sun was at its weakest. Today, we talk about heating bills and chilly mornings. But for them, winter wasn't a nuisance. It was the enemy. And it didn't just threaten your comfort. It came for your life. You didn't pay for winter. You paid into it. With your labor, your livestock, your rations, your sleep. You paid with your very breath. And sometimes, with the lives of those you loved. Forecasts and thermometers would have seemed like sorcery. They had only their instincts and the look of the sky. And when the snow kept falling longer than expected, when the meat ran out and the grain bin echoed empty, you hoped your body could carry you just one more week. Some winters were so cruel they were remembered for generations. We find notes in the margins of church books, quiet confessions of horror. Parents abandoning children they couldn't feed. Old men slipping into the woods, choosing silence over survival. Villages disappearing entirely from tax records. Just gone. This wasn't disaster. This was routine. Because in the medieval world, winter wasn't a season. It was a slow, deliberate catastrophe. And every year, you fought to outlast it, knowing one day you might not. That toothache that's been nagging at you for weeks? You know it's getting worse, but the thought of treatment terrifies you more than the pain. In medieval times, dental care meant one thing: the barber surgeon. These were the guys who cut hair one minute and yanked teeth the next,
with no formal medical training beyond apprenticeship. Their tools were simple: pliers, knives, and a strong arm. Anesthesia consisted of alcohol if you were lucky, or just biting down on a piece of leather. Dental problems were rampant in medieval Europe. Coarse bread full of grit wore down teeth quickly. Sugar wasn't common yet, but honey and dried fruit still caused cavities. Without any concept of brushing, teeth rotted steadily from childhood. Archaeological finds show most medieval skulls have significant dental damage by age 30. Abscesses were common and often fatal when infection spread to the jaw or brain. The lucky ones lost teeth early. The unlucky ones died from infected roots. When the pain became unbearable, you went to the barber surgeon. His shop displayed bloody bandages out front as advertising. The procedure was straightforward. He'd pin you down, wedge his pliers around the offending tooth, and pull with all his weight. If the tooth broke, he'd dig out the roots with a pointed tool called a dental elevator. There were no sterilized instruments. The same pliers might be used on a dozen patients between cleanings. Accounts describe patients screaming loud enough to be heard streets away.
Barber surgeons themselves lived difficult lives. They were looked down upon by real doctors, but performed most actual medical procedures. Their pay was poor unless they landed a noble patron. Many supplemented incomes by performing public surgeries as entertainment. Crowds would gather to watch amputations. The barber's pole outside their shops symbolized their dual profession: red for blood, white for bandages, blue for veins. Some became quite skilled through experience, but they still worked with completely wrong medical theories. Patients often waited until near death before seeking help. Records show many came to surgeons only when tumors were the size of melons or gangrene had set in. The pain of treatment was so notorious that people endured unbelievable suffering rather than face the knife. One account describes a man who lived with an arrowhead lodged in his face for 12 years rather than have it removed. Another tells of a woman who let a breast tumor grow until it split open on its own. She survived longer than most surgical patients would have. Dental care was especially feared because everyone needed it eventually. Unlike other surgeries that might be avoided, tooth decay was nearly universal. Some people resorted to knocking out their own teeth with stones to avoid the barber surgeon. Others used dangerous homemade remedies. One involved packing a cavity with gunpowder and lighting it. The lucky few who kept their teeth into old age usually had them worn down to the gums from coarse food. The barber surgeon's reign lasted centuries because there were no better options. Universities taught medical theory, but little practical healing. The Catholic Church discouraged dissection, limiting anatomical knowledge. Effective painkillers like opium were expensive imports. Most people simply accepted that medical treatment would be agonizing and possibly fatal. It wasn't until the 18th century that dentistry began separating from barbery, and even then, procedures remained brutal by modern standards. What's remarkable isn't how bad medieval medicine was, but that anyone survived it at all. The human body's resilience carried people through treatments that should have been fatal. Barber surgeons occasionally stumbled onto effective techniques through trial and error. Some even developed early versions of modern procedures, like setting bones or draining abscesses. But the overall picture was grim. If you got sick or injured in the Middle Ages, your chances were poor, and the cure might well kill you faster than the disease. You wake before dawn to work the same fields your grandfather plowed. The boundaries of your world stretch no further than the edge of your Lord's estate. This isn't just your life, it's your children's fate, and their children's after them. The medieval class system locked people into their social positions at birth with thicker bars than any prison. Peasants made up 90% of the population, but controlled almost nothing. You were tied to the land through serfdom, not quite a slave, but far from free. The law required you to work your lord's fields 3 days a week, minimum, before tending your own plot. Marriage needed the lord's permission.
Leaving the manor required paying a fee. Your best hope was that your children might inherit your small cottage when you died, but even that wasn't guaranteed. Social mobility existed in theory, but rarely in practice. The church offered one of the few escape routes. A smart peasant boy might become a priest if he learned Latin. Only about 1 in 100 managed this leap. Military service provided another slim chance. But these were exceptions that proved the rule. For every success story, thousands died in the same fields they were born in. The law actively prevented upward movement. Sumptuary laws dictated what clothes each class could wear, so no one got ideas above their station. A 1363 English law specified exactly how much fabric a plowman's wife could have in her dress. Peasants couldn't testify against nobles in court. Education was discouraged. One medieval writer warned that teaching peasants to read puts coal in the fireplace that burns down the house. Your place was to work, not think.
Skilled artisans had slightly more freedom, but hit ceilings. A talented stonemason might travel between castles for work, but guilds controlled who could practice trades and kept membership in the family. Apprenticeships cost money poor families didn't have. Even successful craftsmen remained commoners, vulnerable to noble whims. One tax record shows a wealthy London baker still had to provide bread to the local lord's household for free. The few peasants who escaped usually did so through extraordinary luck. Chaucer's fictional miller might marry his daughter to a squire, but real cases were vanishingly rare. One actual success story is Richard Whittington, the real Dick Whittington, who rose from merchant's son to Lord Mayor of London. But this happened in the late 1300s, when the Black Death temporarily loosened social structures. Most peasants never met anyone who'd changed their station. Nobles reinforced the system constantly. They taught that the three estates, those who pray, fight, and work, reflected God's will. Peasant revolts like the 1381 English uprising were crushed brutally to maintain order. After one failed rebellion, a chronicler wrote that peasants should be kept like dogs to prevent another. The church preached contentment with one's lot. Claiming hardship on earth meant reward in heaven. Marriage patterns locked in class divides. Peasants married within walking distance of their village. Nobles arranged unions to consolidate land holdings. The two worlds rarely mixed. When they did, the peasant faced consequences. One record tells of a nobleman's daughter buried alive for marrying a commoner. Even love couldn't break through class barriers. The system persisted because most people accepted it. Change seemed impossible when even kings believed in the divine right of rulers. Peasant folktales celebrated clever commoners outwitting nobles, but these were fantasies. Real life offered no fairy godmothers. Your best hope was a kind lord who didn't demand more than traditional duties. Stability was prized over mobility, because upheaval usually meant suffering. Winter was coming, crops failed, and wars happened. In this uncertain world, knowing your place provided some security. The Lord might be harsh, but owed protection, in theory. The church might take your tithe, but offered community. Nobody starved alone. The village would share what little it had. This safety net came at the cost of freedom, but most didn't see an alternative. The records show rare instances of happy peasants. One 14th century English court document describes a serf refusing freedom because it would mean losing his land. To modernize, this seems bizarre, but made sense in context. Without land, you were nobody. With it, you had identity and purpose. Social mobility meant risking everything,
for a slim chance at something better. Most chose the devil they knew. We judge medieval society by our standards of opportunity. They valued stability over mobility, knowing chaos could mean starvation. Your great-great-grandchildren would work the same fields because that meant the family survived. Today's social mobility would seem terrifying to medieval peasants. The idea that their children might starve if they didn't better themselves. The rigid system was brutal, but predictable, and in an uncertain world, predictability meant survival. The truth is, most medieval peasants never imagined rising in station any more than fish imagine climbing trees. The idea that everyone should have equal opportunity would have seemed as absurd to them as divine right monarchy does to us. They measured success in full bellies and surviving another winter, not social climbing. When your grandfather's plow breaks, you don't dream of owning the field. You hope to still be around to repair it next season. That was medieval ambition in a nutshell. The Lord's whim. You're walking behind the plow when you see the Lord's men riding toward your field. That pit in your stomach isn't just hunger, it's dread. One wrong word, one bad harvest, one rumor spread in the manor house, and your whole life could unravel. Medieval nobles held absolute power over peasants, and they used it. Your crops, your animals, even your children, existed at their whim. Legal protections barely existed. Justice favored the wealthy so completely that complaining often made things worse. The concept of droit du seigneur, the supposed right of a lord to take a peasant bride's virginity, is debated by historians. But whether this specific practice was real hardly matters. The underlying truth was clear. Nobles took what they wanted. Court records show repeated cases of lords demanding sexual favors from peasant women. One 14th century English petition describes a lord who imprisoned a husband until his wife submitted to him. Another tells of a knight who kidnapped a miller's daughter. The church occasionally protested such abuses, but punishments were rare, unless the noble had powerful enemies. Taxes and fees could ruin you overnight. The lord might suddenly demand extra labor during planting season. Bad harvest? He still took his share first, leaving you to starve. One surviving account tells of a French peasant whose entire wheat crop was seized as punishment for letting livestock wander onto the Lord's land. Others describe families turned out of their homes because the Lord wanted to expand his hunting grounds. Laws theoretically limited some abuses, but enforcing them required money and connections you didn't have. Peasants had few ways to fight back. Local courts were run by the Lord's relatives or cronies. Higher courts cost money to access. One study of medieval English court cases found nobles won over 90% of disputes against peasants. Even when peasants banded together, the odds were stacked against them. After the 1381 Peasants' Revolt in England, leaders were executed via hanging, drawing, and quartering. A message to anyone considering resistance. Lesser punishments included branding or losing a hand. You learned quickly to swallow your grievances. The psychological toll shaped entire villages. Peasants developed coping mechanisms, like false deference, acting stupid to avoid arousing the Lord's interest. Folk tales warned against trusting nobles, even seemingly kind ones. Parents taught children to stay quiet around officials. Some villages kept fools' hats, ready to don when inspectors came, playing up their ignorance to lower expectations.
You survived by making yourself invisible. Nobles justified their power through elaborate hierarchies. The feudal system claimed God himself ordained their rule. Sermons preached that questioning authority risked damnation. Royal decrees compared peasants to children needing firm guidance. One 13th century law code stated serfs existed to labor and obey. Luxuries like hunting rights were strictly reserved for elites. Poaching a deer could mean execution. Even wealthy peasants faced limits. Some towns banned them from building stone houses that might rival manors. Women faced additional vulnerabilities. Widows might lose their land unless they remarried quickly, often to men the Lord approved. Unmarried daughters could be forced into arrangements benefiting noble families. One German record describes a lord refusing to let a peasant woman marry outside his domain unless her fiancé paid his weight in silver. Sexual violence went unpunished unless it caused another noble offense, like trespassing on a rival's peasantry. The birth of a noble's bastard child might earn the mother a small payment, but more often brought shame and hardship. Most peasants internalized this oppression as inevitable. Religious teachings framed suffering as virtuous. The cycle of poverty made resistance seem futile. Your grandparents endured, so you would too. Some even took pride in their role. One medieval poem boasts of peasants whose labor feeds them all. This resignation wasn't weakness. It was pragmatism in a system designed to crush defiance. Better to focus on surviving another year than tilt at windmills. The few revolts that succeeded usually did so briefly. The aforementioned 1381 uprising forced some concessions before collapsing. The Jacquerie Rebellion in France won minor reforms in 1358. But lasting change required shifts in economics and technology that wouldn't come for centuries. Meanwhile, the Lord still controlled the mill where you had to grind your grain, the oven where you baked bread, and the court where your disputes were settled. His horses ate better than your children, his dogs slept warmer than your grandparents, and there wasn't a damn thing you could do about it. Nobles weren't all monsters, some genuinely tried to rule fairly, but the system incentivized abuse. A lord who didn't extract maximum value from his lands risked falling behind richer peers. Harsh rule became self-perpetuating. Each generation of peasants grew up expecting cruelty. Each generation of nobles grew up giving it. The occasional kind master stood out precisely because he was unusual. More typical was the English lord who, when asked why he oppressed his peasants, reportedly answered, "They are not mine, I am theirs." That sums up the medieval power dynamic perfectly. You existed for the lord's benefit, not the other way around. The miracle isn't that peasants occasionally rebelled, but that they mostly didn't. Day after day, they plowed fields whose bounty they'd never fully enjoy, built homes they could be evicted from, raised children who'd inherit their chains. They did it because the alternative was starvation or execution. Modern people talk about knowing your place as a metaphor. Medieval peasants knew theirs literally. It was marked by the Lord's boundary stones, and stepping beyond them invited disaster. Your whole life fit inside those lines. Childbirth. A coin toss. The contractions started at dawn, but you knew better than to expect this to be over quickly. Childbirth in medieval times wasn't just painful. It was a roll of the dice where the house always won. About 1 in 5 mothers died in or shortly after delivery. Your baby had a 1 in 3 chance of not making it past age 5. These weren't risks. They were near certainties people planned for. Midwives were your only help, and their knowledge was hit or miss.
Some had generations of herbal wisdom passed down. Others just knew to tell you to pray. They might give you ergot-infected rye to speed contractions, the same fungus that caused St. Anthony's fire, but in small doses could induce labor. If the baby got stuck, they'd reach in with unwashed hands to reposition it, often tearing you in the process. Infection was almost guaranteed. Breech births killed routinely. Without cesareans, the midwife might try turning the baby by pressing on your swollen belly. If that failed, she'd pull the infant out by its feet, if you were lucky. Some records describe midwives breaking babies' bones to get them out. The alternative was watching the mother die from internal ruptures. Either way, someone wasn't leaving that room alive. Postpartum care was practically non-existent. You'd be back working in days because the fields didn't care about recovery. Hemorrhaging could strike weeks later when you were hauling water or grinding grain. Childbed fever from infected tears killed slowly and painfully. One Welsh poem describes a woman's fevered hallucinations as angels peeling her skin like an onion before she died. Even royal women faced these dangers. Queens had better rooms and cleaner linens, but the same primitive care. Two of England's queens, Jane Seymour and Catherine Parr, died from childbirth complications. Tudor doctors used the same dangerous techniques on nobles as on peasants, just with more expensive herbs. Wealth couldn't fix a ruptured uterus or stop septicemia.
Newborns faced worse odds. Umbilical cords were cut with dirty knives, inviting tetanus. Wet nurses sometimes passed on diseases. If you couldn't produce milk, the baby might be fed animal milk from a hollowed-out cow horn, a recipe for digestive disasters. Records show some villages lost half their babies before age 1 during bad years. Graveyards had special sections just for unbaptized infants. People developed brutal coping mechanisms. Parents often didn't name children until they survived a year. Folk rhymes taught kids not to get attached to siblings. Cradles full, coffins full, God knows which shall be taken. Some mothers deliberately spaced pregnancies closer together, knowing half wouldn't make it. You loved your children, but learned not to count on keeping them. The wealthy tried strange preventatives. Noble women wore belts with saints' relics during labor. Some drank powdered gemstones mixed in wine. A few nobles hired male physicians who'd never seen a birth, but charged dearly for useless advice. One French doctor's manual recommended hanging weasel testicles around the mother's neck to ease delivery. Stillbirths were so common, they had their own rituals. Unbaptized babies couldn't be buried in consecrated ground, so villages had limbo gardens. Some mothers secretly buried them at crossroads, so their souls might wander into a passing christening party. The church eventually approved emergency baptisms. Midwives could perform them if death seemed imminent. The constant losses shaped minds. People saw infant death as normal, but still mourned deeply. Parish records show parents giving the same name to multiple children as replacements died. Some women had 15 pregnancies to ensure 3 surviving kids. The cycle wore bodies out. Osteoporosis was common in medieval women's skeletons, from back-to-back pregnancies draining calcium. Men weren't spared the trauma. Fathers lost wives they couldn't replace easily. Widowers with small children faced hard choices: remarry quickly or watch their family starve. Some wills show men leaving money for masses to be said, for wives who died in childbirth decades earlier. The grief lingered even as the world moved on. Religious explanations offered little comfort. The church called labor pain Eve's punishment for original sin. Suffering supposedly purified mothers' souls.
Some priests claim stillbirth resulted from hidden maternal sins. Women internalized this guilt. One English mother's will apologizes to God for failing to birth a living child. The equipment was as dangerous as the theories. Birthing chairs had narrow seats that could trap babies. Herbal suppositories contained poisonous plants like belladonna. Bloodletting after delivery weakened already exhausted women. One German midwife's kit included a hooked birthing spoon for extracting dead fetuses. It often caused fatal tearing. People knew the risks, but had few options. Abstinence was the only reliable birth control, and that meant risking abandonment by your husband. Herbal contraceptives like silphium had gone extinct from overuse. The rhythm method didn't work when malnutrition made periods irregular. You got pregnant when your husband wanted sex, and nature decided the rest.
The church's watchful eye. The church bell wakes you before dawn, not just calling you to mass, but reminding you who really runs things. From the moment you're born until they shovel dirt on your coffin, the medieval church controls every aspect of life. You think getting married is personal? The church says you can't do it during Advent or Lent. Hungry for meat? They've banned it every Friday, Saturday, and for weeks before Easter. Even sex with your own spouse follows church-approved schedules. No Sundays, Wednesdays, Fridays, or feast days. That's anywhere from 120 to 170 days per year when getting intimate could damn you to hell. Priests don't just preach, they enforce. Church courts try cases ranging from missing ties to witchcraft. One English record shows a woman hauled in for breastfeeding during Mass. Another documents a baker whipped for working on Sunday. Your local priest knows everyone's business because confession requires detailing sins specifically. One manual instructs priests to ask married couples, "How many times did you have relations this week?" Answer wrong and you're doing penance. One French peasant's sentence involved walking barefoot to 5 different shrines, a month's journey, because he plowed his field on a feast day. The economic burden never lets up. You owe the church 1/10 of everything: grain, livestock, even eggs from your chickens. Special collections appear whenever bishops want new vestments or cathedral repairs. One German village complained their priest demanded payment for last rites before he'd bury their dead. Witnesses described corpses rotting in homes while families scrambled to pay up. Failed to tithe properly? That's a sin requiring paid indulgences to cleanse, the original pay-to-play system. People resist in quiet ways. Records show peasants swapping forbidden meat for fish-shaped cheeses during fasts. Some villages hold secret midnight masses, where they ignore preaching to drink and tell stories. Farmers near Canterbury perfected Sunday plowing, working fields at night when no officials watched. One priest's diary complains about finding warm plow handles in morning dew, proving someone worked before dawn. Women hide herbs in their sleeves to terminate pregnancies despite church bans, while men joke about accidentally hunting on feast days. When clergy visit, suddenly everyone's too pious for words. Fear keeps most in line, though. The church controls your afterlife, and they'll gladly describe hell's horrors. One medieval painting shows damned souls boiled in giant cooking pots while demons stab them with pitchforks. Priests lecture that even thinking about breaking rules can damn you. They've basically invented thought crimes. Heretics get burned alive as public spectacles. When the Lollards translate the Bible into English, authorities arrest them for treason. Your options are limited: obey or spend eternity in fire.
Marriage is church business through and through. Want proof your wedding happened? Better hope the priest wrote it down. One Essex couple discovered years later that their priest forgot to record their vows, technically making their children bastards. Annulments required church approval and bribes. In Normandy, a woman seeking divorce from her abusive husband had to prove he was impotent, with eyewitness testimony about their sex life. Most just endure miserable marriages rather than face that humiliation. Death brings more rules. You must die with a priest present, or risk burial in unconsecrated ground. Wills get contested in church courts for fees. One London widow had her inheritance seized because she allegedly took too long picking an executor. Your corpse wears a shroud tax sticker showing you paid for proper burial. Even in death, you're a revenue stream. The wealthy play by different rules. Nobles buy lavish tombs inside churches, so their bones get blessed forever. Rich merchants purchase family chapels, where priests say daily masses for their souls. King John of England once got absolved for robbing monasteries by paying the Pope more than he stole. Money can't buy happiness, but it buys salvation. People develop twisted logic to cope. When a Bavarian village suffers plague after skipping tides, they don't blame germs. They assume God's punishing them. Another town burns a mentally disabled woman when prayers fail to end their famine. Reasonable people do unreasonable things because the church frames everything as spiritual warfare. Your actual life matters less than scoring points for the afterlife. Yet somehow, everyday needs keep breaking through. Peasants work feast days because hungry children outweigh distant hell. Couples have sex on forbidden days because humans aren't calendars. Farmers hide grain from tithe collectors because survival beats theology. The church's power is absolute, but human nature is relentless. Over centuries, that tension will crack the system wide open. You bow your head when the priest passes. You mutter the right prayers. You pay your tithes, mostly. And when no one's looking, you might just eat that sausage on Friday. After all, God helps those who help themselves. The illusion of holidays. The church bells ring for a feast day, and you groan instead of cheer. That holy day off from field work? It just means swapping one back-breaking chore for another. The medieval year had about 50 mandatory holidays, nearly one a week. But peasants didn't get modern-style vacations. Your day off might involve preparing a massive feast for the Lord's household, whitewashing the entire church, or walking miles to a shrine pilgrimage. Take Christmas preparations. While nobles feasted for 12 days, you worked twice as hard. The Lord expected extra firewood hauled for his great hall. The church needed garlands woven from last summer's dried flowers. Your own family wanted special bread, which meant hours grinding scarce winter grain. One manor record from 1391 shows peasants working longer hours in Christmas week than during harvest. The only difference? They got paid in rotten meat instead of coin. Easter brought its own burdens. That ritual spring cleaning wasn't just sweeping. You scrubbed every surface with sand and vinegar until your hands bled. Linens reserved for this 1 week needed washing in icy streams. Then came dyeing eggs with onion skins, a full day's work, and baking pretzels no one could afford to eat. A German peasant's diary complains about spending Easter scrubbing like a scullion, while the priest lectured about rest. Even minor saints' days created labor. On St. John's Eve, you gathered armfuls of special herbs before dawn. St. Swithin's Day required inspecting drainage ditches. Candlemas meant making hundreds of candles from precious tallow stores. Farmers near Canterbury had to plow the priest's acre on St. Thomas Day, an extra field just for church profits. Court rolls show constant fines for skipping these duties. One man paid a month's wages because he neglected to gather rushes for the altar on St. Bridget's Day. Pilgrimages were particularly punishing. That sacred journey to a nearby shrine? You walked barefoot on dirt roads, fasting the whole way. Wealthy pilgrims rode horses and stayed at inns. Peasants slept in ditches and begged for crusts. Some shrines required crawling the last mile on your knees. One surviving pilgrim staff has grooves worn into the wood from months of use. The worst part? You often return to find your unattended crops failing. Ironically, the church condemned actual relaxation. Priests preached against idle hands even on holy days. Some villages banned games and dancing, too frivolous. A 14th century sermon scolds peasants for lolling about like lords when they should be praying or doing pious labor. Many parishes employed holy day watchers to report slackers. One Yorkshire record finds a man for repairing his fence instead of attending a Saints' Day procession.
Peasants found subtle ways to rebel.
Some accidentally worked during mandatory prayers. Others held secret gatherings in barns with stolen ale. A few creatively misinterpreted rules. One village got drunk on medicinal feast day mead for years before being caught. Folk songs mocked holiday hypocrisy. The priest says rest, the Lord says work. The poor man's back is never done. Yet people still craved these breaks. However flawed, holidays provided rare structure beyond endless toil. Even miserable pilgrimages offered change from frozen fields. The chance to eat slightly better food, maybe meat once a month instead of never, kept many going. One peasant's will leave his daughter the good spoon for feast days, suggesting these scraps of pleasure mattered deeply. The worst part wasn't the extra work, it was the dashed hopes. You'd hear stories of grand celebrations in towns, then experience your meager version. That pain lingers in records. A Sussex farmer's diary from 1388 reads, "Michaelmas again, killed the old hen. Children cried for more." Another lists 12 feast days in a row where the family ate nothing but broth. Some laborers worked holidays just to avoid sad gatherings. Children felt this keenly. Peasant kids heard tales of noble children receiving gifts on Epiphany or eating sweets at Easter. Their reality? Getting to carry one precious egg to church before returning to chores. Archaeological digs of poor villages find pathetic toys. A scrap of leather tied to resemble a doll, a rock smoothed into a ball. The closest thing to holiday magic was sometimes being hit slightly less.
The church knew these rituals held society together. Required feasts prevented total despair. Shared suffering built community. Even exploitative holidays gave life fragile meaning. Modern workers complain about answering emails on vacation. Medieval peasants would kill for that level of freedom. Their time off was just work in holy disguise. Some glimpses of real joy broke through. May Day saw young people dancing despite priestly frowns. Harvest home festivals encouraged rare gluttony. Winter solstice brought clandestine drinking games by firelight. These unauthorized moments scared authorities. One bishop's letter warns of peasants taking excessive cheer at unauthorized gatherings. The records are heartbreakingly human. A widow's court testimony mentions saving flour for months to make a fine cake for Easter, like when I was a girl. A shepherd's tally marks show him counting down to the one feast where he got beer. These small hopes in a hard world explain why peasants tolerated the holiday charade. Today we romanticize medieval festivals as quaint affairs. The reality was grinding work, interrupted by slightly different grinding work. That brief church ale or stolen kiss behind the barn wasn't leisure, it was survival. Peasants clung to these flashes of light in endless darkness. Their holidays weren't breaks from life. They were life, in all its painful illusions. The fear of the dark. When dusk fell in medieval villages, your real problems began. That last sliver of sunlight disappearing behind the fields wasn't just the end of another exhausting day. It was the start of a nightly battle for survival. With no streetlights or flashlights, darkness became a physical presence as thick as the walls of your hut. The sort of blackness where you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. And in that darkness, everything became dangerous. Wolves were just the beginning. In rural areas, packs circled villages after sundown, drawn by the scent of livestock and garbage. Historical records from France mention wolves dragging children from doorways and snatching lambs straight from pens.
One English chronicle describes wolves killing 12 people in a single winter near York. You'd hear their howls getting closer as the fire burned down. No comforting campfire stories about these predators. Human threats were worse. Bandits and deserters prowled country roads after dark. A knock on your door at night could mean trouble. Maybe drunken soldiers looking to loot, or neighbors desperate enough to steal your last loaf of bread. Court records list countless cases of nighttime burglaries, where peasants lost tools, food stores, even the blankets off their sleeping children. Some villages paid watchmen to patrol, but half-starved men with sticks weren't much deterrent. Lighting was pathetic by modern standards. The average peasant home had maybe one candle or oil lamp burning for a few precious hours. Tallow candles smelled like burning animal fat and gave off more smoke than light. Wax candles existed, but cost a week's wages each. Rushlights, dried plant stalks dipped in fat, sputtered for about 30 minutes before needing replacement. You'd use them only for absolute necessities, like tending to a sick child or finding the chamber pot. The darkness warped time itself. Without clocks or alarms, villagers relied on church bells and animal noises to guess the hour. Winter nights stretched endlessly, up to 16 hours of darkness in northern regions. Archaeological evidence suggests medieval people adapted with segmented sleep, sleeping for a few hours, waking around midnight for chores or prayer, then sleeping again. This wasn't some peaceful meditation hour. It was biological adjustment to dangerous circumstances. Superstitions flourished in the dark. That strange noise outside wasn't just the wind. Clearly, demons or witches were afoot. Local legends warned of night stalkers like the Germanic Druid that sat on sleepers' chests, or the English rawhead that lurked in dark corners. People hung herbs over doorways and painted crosses on walls not just out of piety, but desperation. One peasant's diary from 1372 describes keeping an axe by his bedding, not for thieves, but the devil's hounds. Even mundane tasks became hazards after sundown. Going to the outhouse meant risking snake bites or falls in the pitch black. Checking on livestock? Prepare to be gored by a startled cow or kicked by a panicked horse. Medical records show nighttime injuries were often worse than daytime ones. No one could see to tend wounds properly until morning. One bone fracture in an Italian skeleton shows signs of having been improperly set by feel alone. Sleeping arrangements reflected the danger. Whole families often shared one bed near the hearth, not just for warmth, but protection. Children slept closest to the wall so adults could react to nighttime threats. Some cottages had hidden compartments under floorboards where valuables, and sometimes people, could be hidden quickly. Archaeological digs in Germany found peasant homes with barred windows and reinforced doors facing inward toward the village center. Everyone knew the real threats came from outside. The wealthy fared little better. Castles had night watchmen, but stone chambers stayed freezing and damp after dark. Servants carried torches to light noble pathways, but those often set tapestries on fire accidentally. One account describes a duke's son breaking his neck falling down an unlit staircase. Even kings dealt with darkness. Henry V once tripped over a sleeping servant in his own chambers. Animals took advantage of human vulnerability. Rats swarmed houses once people slept, contaminating food and spreading disease. Bats flew through poorly thatched roofs. Owls' nighttime calls were considered omens of death. In southern regions, bears occasionally raided homes after dark. One Swiss chronicle mentions a bear carrying off an infant from its cradle in 1347. Fire presented the ultimate nighttime paradox. You needed it for light and safety, but that same fire could burn your home down if left unattended.
Nighttime blazes were common enough that many towns required hearths to be covered after curfew. Some villages stationed buckets of water along streets just in case. The smell of smoke that clung to your clothes wasn't just from cooking. It was the constant reminder that your primary light source could kill you. People developed strange adaptations to nighttime living. Some perfected the ability to navigate their homes completely blind. Tripping over the same stool every night became preferable to wasting candles. Others memorized the precise number of steps between beds and doors. Folk remedies for night terrors included sleeping with iron tools or placing shoes facing outward to confuse evil spirits. None of it worked, but attempting something felt better than lying helpless. Modern sleep issues would baffle medieval peasants. Complaining about insomnia? They'd kill for uninterrupted rest. Need white noise machines? Try dozing through drunken brawls outside your window. Nightlights? A single candle could bankrupt you. The average peasant got less actual sleep than modern humans, despite spending twice as long in bed. Too cold, too scared, and too alert for danger to ever fully rest. Segmented sleep patterns reveal constant low-grade terror. Waking at midnight wasn't some spiritual practice. It was checking to make sure the livestock were still there and the children still breathing. Those midnight hours gave people time to notice strange noises or smells that might indicate danger. Historical accounts describe villagers holding whispered conferences in the dead of night about whether to investigate suspicious sounds. Rare was the person who slept straight through until dawn. This relentless nighttime vigilance wore people down physically. Skeletal remains show signs of chronic sleep deprivation, unhealed stress fractures from nighttime stumbles, dental damage from grinding teeth in fear. One medical text describes night exhaustion as a common peasant ailment alongside malnutrition and lung disease. Modern sleep scientists examining medieval accounts estimate most peasants operated on what we'd now consider severe sleep deprivation year-round. The fear never really ended, just changed with the seasons. Summer nights brought different threats than winter ones, but darkness always meant vulnerability. You might live through plagues and famines, but the dark would always come for you eventually. No peasant ever truly rested easy, not with so many ways to die between dusk and dawn. That crowing rooster at sunrise wasn't just a wake-up call. It was confirmation you'd survived another night. That twitching in your left eye isn't just fatigue. It's an omen. In medieval Europe, every hiccup, every odd-shaped cloud, every crow's call carried hidden meaning. Your world pulsed with supernatural forces constantly demanding interpretation. Forget science. Local grandmothers, with their endless proverbs, knew more than any university scholar. Red sky at night, shepherd's delight, wasn't cute poetry. It was survival strategy. Walk past a crossroads at dusk? Bad idea. That's where spirits gathered. Spot a spider spinning clockwise? Good luck's coming, unless it's Tuesday, when the meaning reversed. Your neighbor's cow gives birth to a two-headed calf? Clearly witchcraft at work. Historical court records show peasants bringing lawsuits over supernatural causes. One Yorkshire farmer sued a neighbor in 1378 for blighting crops via evil eye, while a Bavarian widow was fined for weather magic when hail struck after an argument. Some superstitions made practical sense in twisted ways. Avoid that patch of swampy ground? It actually did house malaria-carrying mosquitoes, though villagers blamed miasma instead of insects. That taboo against eating mushrooms saved lives when no one could reliably distinguish poisonous varieties. But mostly, superstitions reflected terrifying powerlessness. When plague struck your village, was it really easier to believe you'd offended fairies than admit there was no way to stop the dying? The church condemned these beliefs but couldn't stamp them out. Peasants slyly blended pagan charms with Christian prayers. One common spell involved reciting the Lord's Prayer backward while burying a dead cat at a crossroads. perfectly holy and completely blasphemous simultaneously. Archaeologists find lead curse tablets in the same churchyards where priests preached against magic. People wanted backup plans when God seemed busy elsewhere. Certain days carried special dangers. Never begin planting on a Friday. The crops would fail. Childbirth on May Day invited fairy kidnappings. An eclipse? Obviously dragons at work, so better bang pots together to scare them off. One chronicle describes a village wasting an entire growing season because every auspicious planting day brought rain. They starved that winter, but at least the stars had been properly aligned. Animals served as supernatural warning systems. A howling dog meant death approached. Foxes circling the village foresaw famine. Even insects got consulted. Ants building high mounds signaled a harsh winter ahead. Peasants spent so much time decoding animal behavior that bestiaries became medieval bestsellers. Never mind that these books claimed beavers castrated themselves to escape hunters. Symbolism mattered more than facts. Household objects developed personalities. Brooms leaned by doors kept evil out. Buried knives under thresholds warded off witches. That weird stain on your wooden spoon? Probably a saint's face that could cure fevers if you licked it. Museum collections overflow with these magical, everyday items peasants refuse to discard across generations. One 14th century will specifically bequeath the healing pot that never boils over to a granddaughter. Medical superstitions proved especially stubborn. Spitting 3 times after encountering a sick person might not prevent plague, but it felt better than doing nothing. Herbal remedies often worked. Willow bark tea really does contain pain-relieving salicylic acid, but peasants credited moonlight harvesting times rather than chemistry. When treatments failed, they assumed incorrect rituals caused it, not the treatment itself. The natural world teemed with invisible threats. That weird-shaped carrot wasn't just ugly, it was a mandrake root that would scream when pulled up, killing everyone nearby. Stumbling in the forest? The elves tripped you for trespassing. Even sneezes required emergency responses. One manuscript instructs readers to immediately say, "God bless you," because the soul might escape during the convulsion. Children learned superstitions before they could walk. Parents tied red strings around babies' wrists to confuse evil spirits. Nursery rhymes doubled as protective spells. One surviving lullaby from Germany translates to, "Sleep tight, or the nightmare will sit on your chest and steal your breath. Pleasant dreams, kids." Archaeologists find children's graves full of charms like pierced coins and witch bottles, showing these beliefs lasted lifetimes. Weather occupied special importance in farming communities. Rain dances weren't ceremonial. People genuinely believed they worked. When drought persisted, villages sometimes turned on suspected weather witches. Trial records from 15th century Switzerland show dozens of elderly women blamed for spoiled harvests. The accusations often started because someone remembered them looking at the sky funny months earlier. Oddly, these beliefs provided genuine comfort sometimes. Finding a horseshoe didn't actually bring luck, but it made people feel more hopeful during bad times. That protective witch mark carved into your doorpost? Probably didn't stop plague, but helped you sleep slightly better. In a world where real control was impossible, superstitions offered illusions of influence. Modern people laugh at these ideas, but medieval peasants would find our trust in science equally naive. They knew firsthand how quickly life could spiral beyond control. Better to blame mischievous spirits than accept random cruelty. That weird ritual involving burying eggs might seem silly, but when it worked once, why risk skipping it? Fear and hope mixed strangely in these practices. Ultimately, superstitions weren't about truth. They were about surviving the unbearable. When your child died mysteriously, it hurt less to blame hexes than accept the universe's indifference. When crops failed, curses explained the injustice. The real magic was how these beliefs helped broken people keep going through sheer, stubborn imagination. You might not control your fate,
but you could hang enough garlic by the door to pretend otherwise. The church eventually co-opted most folk beliefs rather than fighting them. Holy water replaced magic springs. Saints' relics replaced fairy charms. This uneasy truce let peasants keep their coping mechanisms with a Christian veneer. Some shrines even became dual purpose. People prayed to the official saint while secretly leaving offerings for older, hidden powers. Everyone won. The church got obedience. The people kept their psychological armor. Today, we've traded superstitions for different illusions of control. That vitamin regimen? The productivity app promising perfect time management. Medieval peasants would nod in recognition. We all need our talismans against chaos. Their charms seem silly until you realize we still clutch at rituals when life gets scary. The ingredients change, but the hunger for certainty remains. In the end, those peasant grandmothers muttering spells over bubbling pots understood something we've forgotten. Sometimes survival isn't about what's true, but what gets you through the night. Their world demanded constant vigilance against invisible threats, real and imagined. Our modern equivalents might be subtler, but the impulse remains. After all, you still knock on wood sometimes, don't you? The unseen legacy. That quiet life of endless toil built the world you take for granted today. Every time you drive down a country road, you're following paths worn by medieval peasants hauling grain to market. Those neat hedgerows dividing fields? Peasant hands planted them centuries ago to mark boundaries. Even the basic crops we eat, wheat, rye, oats, were selectively bred by generations of farmers who never knew what genetics were. The medieval open field system still shapes modern agriculture. Those long, narrow strips of land you see in aerial photos? That's the three-field rotation system peasants developed to prevent soil exhaustion. They didn't understand nitrogen cycles, but they knew planting legumes every third year kept the dirt productive. Today's crop rotation methods are just refined versions of their trial and error discoveries. Peasant labor literally reshaped geography. Want to know why European landscapes look so orderly? Because medieval communities spent centuries clearing forests, draining marshes, and terracing hillsides. The Domesday Book records over 6,000 water mills in 11th century England, all built and maintained by peasant labor. Those picturesque stone walls crisscrossing the countryside, laid by calloused hands, one rock at a time. We still use medieval infrastructure daily. That stone bridge in your town's center? Probably built on 14th century foundations. Many European cities still follow street plans laid out when they were market towns. London's Strand follows the exact route medieval peasants used to drag boats from one river to another. The word road itself comes from the Old English rad, meaning a path cleared by riding or walking. Medieval peasants invented time management. The modern work week traces back to their forced breaks on Sundays and saints' days. Even our concept of hourly wages began when landlords paid laborers by the day. The word journeyman comes from French journée, meaning a day's work. Those peasants grinding grain before sunrise created the morning routines we complain about today. Their innovations hide in plain sight. That drafty old cottage turned into a coffee shop, built using medieval timber framing techniques that last centuries. The heavy wool sweater you buy as artisanal, made on a loom design unchanged since peasant women wove cloth to pay rents. Even simple things like wheelbarrows and fishing nets were medieval peasant inventions that stuck around because they worked. The food system they built still feeds us. Modern bread uses wheat strains medieval farmers developed. Cheese-making techniques from monastery dairy farms became today's artisanal brands. That apple you're eating? Descended from trees peasants grafted to improve yields. They didn't have agricultural science, but they bred plants and animals through generations of careful observation. We've forgotten how much skill their work required. Plowing a straight furrow takes years to master. Judging soil quality by taste and touch was essential knowledge. Peasants could predict weather by cloud patterns and animal behavior with accuracy that would shame modern meteorologists. Their almanacs mixed astronomy, biology, and folklore into practical guides we'd now call interdisciplinary science. The church records downplay their contributions. Chronicles mention lords and kings while ignoring who actually built their manors. Tax rolls list peasant obligations but not their innovations. Even the word peasant comes from the Old French peasant, meaning of the land, as if they were part of the scenery rather than people shaping it. Medieval peasants created the first labor movements. The 1381 English Revolt coined the phrase, "When Adam delved and Eve span, who was then the gentleman?" An early challenge to class systems. Village councils developed proto-unions to negotiate with landlords. The concept of workers' rights didn't spring from nowhere. It grew from centuries of peasant resistance. Their survival strategies became modern institutions. The three-field rotation evolved into crop science. Village granaries inspired modern food banks. Common grazing lands presaged public parks. Even insurance began when peasant communities pooled resources to rebuild after disasters. What we call progress often just scales up their solutions.
We've inherited their environmental problems too. Deforestation started when peasants cleared land for farming. Soil erosion followed overworked fields. Some medieval mining operations polluted rivers so badly they still run orange today. The climate began changing when population growth forced marginal lands into cultivation. Our ecological crises have roots in their survival choices. The psychological legacy lingers. That Protestant work ethic Max Weber wrote about? Born in medieval peasant villages where slacking meant starvation. Our obsession with property comes from their fight to secure land rights. Even modern workaholism mirrors their constant labor. We just stare at screens instead of swinging scythes. Next time you flip a light switch, remember, someone dug the first coal to heat a peasant's hovel. When you turn on a tap, recall the centuries of ditch digging that led to plumbing. That comfortable bed you sleep in, its ancestor was a lice-infested straw mat. Every modern convenience stands on layers of peasant labor. We don't have medieval peasants to thank for our comforts. We have medieval peasants to thank for the very concept of comfort. They transformed survival into living through generations of unrelenting effort. The least we can do is acknowledge that the dark ages were only dark for those who didn't have to live through them. The next time you complain about your job, imagine doing it with a hand plow in the rain. When you grumble about taxes, remember peasants gave half their crops to lords. Our modern world wasn't built by kings and inventors. It was built by millions of forgotten people whose names never made the history books. They shaped the earth with their hands and passed it to us. We're just living in the world they made.
Conclusion. Next time you flip a light switch, think about medieval peasants huddled around smoky hearths. That hot shower, they went months without washing. Every modern comfort you enjoy stands on centuries of their grinding labor. They cleared your fields, built your roads, and invented techniques we still use today, all while living in constant fear of starvation or violence. Tonight, when you sink into your clean bed, remember those who slept on lice-infested straw. Their quiet endurance built the world we take for granted. Not kings or knights, just ordinary people surviving impossible days. The least we can do is remember. Sleep well, and if tonight's story stayed with you, subscribe so you never miss the next one. I'll be here, waiting whenever you're ready to return.